One of the most extraordinary and radical teachings of the entire Torah is that of the sabbatical year, Shemitah in Hebrew, which means release, to let go. In preparing to enter the land of Israel, God instructs the Israelite people to collectively set aside every seventh year as a year of release for the land, during which all normal agricultural activity, planting, harvesting, and so on, is prohibited. All debts between people are forgiven, and all of the earth's bounty is shared equitably between all people and wildlife. At the heart of this Shemitah vision is the Torah's fundamental assertion that no part of the earth can be truly or completely owned by an individual, because the earth ultimately belongs to the Creator, with humans existing as temporary and conditional caretakers. Every seventh year in the 7-year Shemitah cycle, a person cannot claim that any produce from the earth is theirs and theirs alone. Instead, all food must be treated as communal property, hefker in Hebrew. So let's read this source together here. Let's take a look at it. This is in Leviticus, one of the sources for Shemitah in the Torah, and it says, "And the Creator spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, 'Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land that I'm giving you, the land shall observe a Sabbath to God. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath to the Creator. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land.'" Here, this mentioning of not reaping the aftergrowth of your harvest, so on, is understood as what gardeners would call volunteers, things that the earth grows of its own accord that you do not intend to grow. If you were, say, planting wheat one year, and when you harvested, inevitably some wheat seeds fell to the ground and it would come up the next year. So the way that this is understood is that you cannot treat that produce in the same way that you would typically as yours and yours alone, but that you would have to make sure that those volunteers, that growth, that food would be available to everyone. Here, continuing in verse 6, it speaks about that specifically. It says, "The Sabbath yield of the land is for you for eating, for your servant, for your handmaid, for your hired hand, your resident settler who sojourns with you, and your domestic animal, your wild beasts that are in your land, shall be all its produce to eat." So here it's saying that anything that the earth does produce during this year is, and we don't have to, here the number of categories are mentioned. We don't need to concern ourselves at this moment with what each of these categories means exactly, but suffice to say that all people, all animals, whether domesticated or wild, need to have equal access to anything that the earth produces during this year. Continuing on, a few verses later, the Torah makes quite explicit where this is all coming from. It says, "But the land must not be sold in perpetuity, must not be sold forever, for the land is mine," Kili ha'aretz, in Hebrew, that the land, the earth is mine being God's. "You are but sojourners and resident settlers with me. Throughout all of the land that you hold, you must allow for the redemption of the land." You must allow this land to leave your hands and be communal property, truly 1 year out of every 7. So I want to focus on these last, this verses 23 and 24. And here we find the Torah making explicit a foundational and essential part of its worldview, namely that the earth is not ours. The earth is the Creator's. The Torah established a sabbatical year in order to help foster a society that deeply integrates this understanding into every fiber of their being. So if the sabbatical year requires that we not relate to the earth's bounty as private property, how is this imagined to be put into practice? Let's look here at one more text. This comes from the Mission of Torah, which is from Moses Maimonides. who is a 12th century teacher. And here he begins to help us get a picture of what this might look like for your average farmer. So here he says it's a positive commandment to release or annul ownership of everything that comes out of the ground in the seventh year. As it says elsewhere in the Torah, in the seventh year, you're to let it go, let your land go and let it be. Anyone who locks up their vineyard or fences in their field in the seventh year has violated a positive commandment. And similarly, someone who harvests all their fruits and brings them inside their house. Rather, everything should be seen as ownerless, communal, and everyone has equal claim to it, as it says in the Torah, and the needy of your people may eat it on the seventh year. The owner may bring in small amounts of produce, the way one does from ownerless property, from communal property, for example, a little bit of oil or a little bit of wine. And here it says, they brought in a bit more than that. That's also okay, but not ideal. So here we have this extraordinary picture, I think, of individual landowners actually taking down their fences during the sabbatical year, taking down their fences on their farms to make it possible for all people and all animals to have equal access. And then the text adds this remarkable detail in describing that your landowner can bring in whatever it is, dates or wheat or oil or wine, into their home only as long as that same specific food item is easily accessible and available to all people. And as soon as it no longer is available to the general public, you need to take that item out of your house, physically, literally out of your house, to make sure that everyone has access to it. So one of the features that characterizes the Shemitah year is clearly radical sharing. Everything is communal. This year is meant to be a great equalizer, a time when the social fabric of society is rebalanced towards greater equity and equality. And even though the sabbatical year is one when we're meant to let the earth rest, and thus could be kind of imagined as a year of great scarcity, I have to imagine that the requirement to relate to all food as communal, to give and take freely with one another, ensuring that everyone has what they need, would lead people to experience this time as a time of tremendous shared abundance. So these values of Shemitah really have informed Abundance Farm from the beginning, and are really also informed this project, the Shared Abundance Gardens project that you're a part of. And we hope that your participation in this initiative leads to a greater sense of shared abundance and a greater sense of community.